Welcome everybody, and a special welcome to Julia Harnoncourt. I hope I pronounced it correctly now.
Yes.
And we are very, very happy to have you, and I'm especially happy to have you because this is my first in-person meeting of this kind again after my return. So I'm super happy that you're here with such an exciting topic to talk about. So for everybody, Julia earned her master's degree in history in 2012 at the University of Vienna, with a work on population control in 19th-century colonial Algeria. For her PhD, she sort of switched the region a little bit to the other part of the world and worked on unfree labor, Trabalho, escravo.
Trabalho escravo.
Close enough. I'm sorry. In Brazilian agriculture, and today's presentation will be part of this research, right? So it's the comparison between two interview series that you conducted in 2014 and 2022. Here it is. And it looks at the intertwinement of political changes and global capitalism on rural work in Brazil, where suddenly, if I understand this correctly, unfree labor spiked again, although it's been a felony since 1995. And you're going to introduce us to the interconnections of the political developments that have led to this development, right? And so we are very, very happy to learn more about this. And then I'm happy to hand over to you. What's yours?
Just to do a little correction, as I think that most of you probably haven't studied this topic, so it's a bit more like the bigger part of it is presenting the topic, and then I'm going to put these the newer developments more or less in question, because I did this, the second study I only did in November, and the last interview I had last week online, so it's also still a bit of a work in progress. So this is what I'm going to present first. At first, to know what we're talking about when we talk about unfree labor in Brazil, called Trabalho escravo. So I'm going to present the legal definition and how it's changed over time, because also it's changed over time. And then I'm going to explain a bit what most of the literature talks about when they talk about it, a bit how the labor situation looks like. Yeah, then I'm going to present some state mechanisms. There are many more, but the most important ones, and a bit the influences on the labor regime, like the societal and labor hierarchies that work inside the labor regime too, as well as land disputes and violence on the countryside, especially in the Amazon region, as well as racism and gender roles. And then I'm going to talk about political changes in the labor regime and how we might be able to explain some of them at least, and what they are. And then a bit about the global scale, just to have a look at it. Okay, just to know, I researched this labor regime in Pará. Pará is a northern state of Brazil, and a part of the Amazon region. And this is just to know where it is. These little dots that you can see here, the stars, is places where I was actually taking interviews, either in 2014 or now. And the other places are last year, places where last year this form of unfree labor was from. Okay, so Trabalho escravo is considered a felony since 1995. This came out of a very heavy case that was brought to the OAS, the Organization of American, I forgot. American or Inter-American Court, something like this. And Brazil was sanctioned to do something against this form of unfree labor. By then, it was only defined by laborers who were impeded to leave the workplace, so classical unfree labor, let's say, and as well as their bondage. In 2003, this law was made a bit broader. This came also out of the practiced in the fight against this unfree labor. So it was the same, like laborers who were impeded to leave the workplace, as well as debt bondage, but it also additionally they added degrading labor conditions and exhausting workdays. This is a bit of a blurry concept. So the idea, more or less, if you look at the judgments, you could see that it is only where laborers have that degrading labor conditions that their life is in danger, or have to work that much that their life is in danger. Meaning that, for example, in the countryside, but also in other production sites, the laborers mostly live at the same place where they work, and meaning that, for example, the food that they eat is already rotten, or the water they drink could harm their health, for example. Or like exhausting work days. I mean, some people work with heavy machinery, and then if they work for 10 hours or more and have no pauses, this is actually endangering their life. So if this happens, then it is defined as trabalho escravo. And only one of these elements, theoretically at least, there is always a big gap between theory and reality, would define trabalho escravo. So in the literature, to explain it a bit better what we're talking about, the system of trabalho escravo for the laborers themselves is described as a vicious cycle. Their laborers start with a very precarious living situation, where they already know that they won't get jobs that are paid decently, that they have not a lot of school education, and yeah, they live they are poor and live in an environment with not very nice living places, etc., etc. Then there are like two types how they could get into trabalho escravo. One is a figure that in Brazil is called gato, a labor entitled and tells them, I have a beautiful job offer for you, come with me. I will give you money already, which is really one of the most important points, because then they can give it to the family directly. And then this labor entitled brings the laborers to their place of labor. The travel is already added as some form of debt, and so debt bondage already begins here. Other laborers go to Pará, this region that I saw before, on their own, because they know that there it is easier to get more money for the work, which is still true. And so then they reside in something that is called a hotel. It's not a real hotel, it's a place where as well the laborers know that they can find people who are searching for laborers, as well as those gatos know that they can find laborers there. So normally here, these labor enticers would pay the debt of the laborer, and then also here the debt bondage will begin. So debt bondage begins already before the laborers arrive at their place of work. The travel is, the condition of the laborers as migrant laborers is also very important for this system to work. So they are at a place where they don't know very well the geography, they don't have family, they don't have friends. So it's nearly never laborers from the next village that they take. When they arrive at the workplace, then as I might have already somehow mentioned, one of the important points is that they're very often at a very secluded place in the middle of the Amazon region. So they wouldn't even know, there is no buses going, there is not many cars passing by, something like this. So if they wanted to leave, they wouldn't even know how to leave without going for days through the jungle, which is also dangerous. Then debts, as I already mentioned, are an important factor of this labor regime. And they have to pay for the food, even for tools that they need for work, but also for their sleeping places, household items, etc. And they only can buy it at one shop on the farm, which has very expensive prices. And so their debts grow bigger and bigger while they work. And also they have no control over how many how much they owe. The only person who has control over that is the employer. Other forms, mechanisms of coercion are the removal of their documents, official documents, if they have them, and also in many cases armed personnel. The labor is very hard, as I mentioned before. They get paid less as they have been promised, and the food is often rotten. There is many accounts from people about a lack in potable water, and also complaints about sanitary facilities, etc. These sleeping places are mostly overcrowded, and they're very often made out of black plastic sheets, which is, they mention it very often, the black plastic sheets, which I imagine, like, having been in the Amazon region, must be terrible. I mean, they don't really help you for heat. I mean, they make the place even hotter than it is outside. Then they don't guard from, I don't know, animals. Yeah, and not really help when it is raining, so it doesn't, yeah. It must be very uncomfortable to live in a little hut made out of plastic sheets, of black plastic sheets. Then there is no medical care, and yeah, which is terrible also because work accidents happen a lot, and a lot of people get malaria. During my interviews in 2014, I was able to interview one laborer who was in a condition like this. Well, he would have said he wasn't, but quite sure, listening to what he has told me, it must have been a living condition like this, even though, I mean, he didn't go to the judge, so we would never know if he would have been judged as that. But the same farm was later, when he already left, was one of very well-known cases, actually, of Trabalho. So he also talked about people getting sick, not only by malaria, but also by other people who were spraying poison. Yeah, so I'm going to read this interview extract. The thing the manager told us was to use milk, to drink a lot of milk. There was no shortage of milk for the people who sprayed poison. But there was no protection and adequate clothing, not even masks. I knew a guy who got sick from the poison. He lost weight, had respiratory problems, and had to vomit every hour. He still worked on the farm for 3 more months while being sick. Then he got worse, and they took him to the hospital. We never saw him again. So in this case, somebody must have helped this person, but normally also in another part of the interview, he tells us that he got malaria, other people got malaria, and they had to just to look how they would get help. So, yeah, the lack of the protection of the laborers is also typical in Trabalho escravo. In the end, when they leave the workplace, so normally such a laborer, they only need a labor for a period of time, so normally this labor ends after some months or maybe a year, 2 years, and then they can go, but normally they haven't earned anything or nearly nothing because of their debts. In some cases, laborers flee. Then, if laborers flee, we can see the nature of the violence of this situation. There are many accounts where laborers have been shot at or killed, and also in many cases they found even graveyards, secret graveyards on the fazendas. Also, where this laborer that I called Andreas, that's not his real name, yeah, has worked. There was also secret graveyards found later on. So if they leave the workplace, the farm, without having earned anything, the vicious cycle begins anew, and there are actually some laborers who were found in this labor condition more than once. And laborers who fled or who informed the authorities for them to come to free them are often freed even years after the labor condition ended. So in 1995, well, these laws, what did they do after they had to do something against slavery prohibition? In 1995, as I have already told you, the laws were made, and the conviction theoretically could be punished with 2 to 8 years of prison. There was nearly never anyone imprisoned because of the Trabalho. So here you can see the difference between theory and reality. And they could, they normally have to pay a fee, which happens. So they have to pay the unpaid wages to the laborers, and also some fee that is, I don't know, that is because they did damage to society, so they have to pay some extra fee, which doesn't go to the laborers, but to further fight against Trabalho. Yeah, then labor inspection unit was created. They have special training and such. We will talk about this also a little bit later. And then something that is called the lista suja, the dirty list, which is actually a cool thing, because here every enterprise where Trabalho escravo was found comes on this list, and then they have some pacts where they say that where for other enterprises it is not allowed to subcontract those enterprises who are on the list, and also for banks not to give them credit. Yeah, this might be a very important instrument. For now, it is not sure how this list is going on again, because one enterprise in construction tried to pay, to pay them off so that they wouldn't be put on the list, which apparently worked. And so if this works now for once, we don't know what is going to happen next. Then different pacts were made, like the one together with this lista suja, and then a national and regional commissions to eradicate Trabalho escravo were created. Well, for Pará, the problem is that they have never really worked. So in some states they work well, in some. Yeah, we have already seen that there is a division between law and reality. The law is very well thought through, but the reality looks a bit different, very different. And as one of my interview partners told me, Pará is the land without law. So there is a big problem of impunity. So if we now, okay, this is more about the farm, the hierarchies on the farm, but it's important to know that the hierarchies on the farm mirror hierarchies in society. Yeah, and these hierarchies are put in place in order to strengthen labor discipline, of course. In my research, I worked with like 2 types. I tried to typify these farms, and I worked with 2 types of farms. Strict farms, who are economical enterprises, where the owners are influential in politics. They are not farmers. They are lawyers or whatever, somewhere else. They don't live on the farm, and they have the farm as, or more than one farm normally, as a side business. And the only thing that is important to them is the bottom line. That the idea is not to mistreat the laborers, they just don't care. It's more about not caring. And then there are smaller farms where the owners they live normally on the farms, they have a paternalistic style of management. They're normally locally very well known, they're known in the church, they give money to, donate money to, I don't know, some causes. And so for them, it's really important to be the powerful guy. So it's this paternalistic idea. Yeah, on the bigger farms, there exist farm managers. They're not very often mentioned in the literature or also by the interviewees. So I'm also not talking very much about them now. And then there is these gatos that I've already mentioned. They're not only enticed, this is why I left the name gato, and armed personnel. The gatos normally recruit the laborers, but they also organize the laborers, and sometimes they work as their own enterprises. So a farm manager says, I don't know, I just want this kind of plant cleared. I don't care how you do it. and they pay the gato, and the gato organizes everything on his own. There are gatos who are famously cruel, who have killed many people, and everybody knows the name Chico, for example. But there are also gatos who also have to work and who are also victims of trabalho escravo, so they are also forced to do what they do. And in some interviews, you also hear like stories that the best friend of the brother got with this job and stuff like that. So it's not really clear. There's very different positions of this gato. And yeah, normally these gatos and the armed personnel come from the same social strata as the laborers. They just manage to get like better positions inside the system. And both of them supervise the laborers, how fast they work, etc. Also, if they check if they don't go outside, but the armed personnel supposedly is only there to see if nobody gets inside. But it's of course also a big warning if you have people with guns there. Well, the laborers they have very different levels of education. On some big farms, you even have teachers and veterinarians, and I don't know what. You have a lot of different forms of labor positions. But yeah, the laborers who, for example, clear the forest or take care of the cattle or whatever, they have different levels of education, and they're divided into teams. And like in a classical ideology of divided impera, these laborers have different work systems. One gets paid per hours, the others get paid for, I don't know, for the amount they work or clear. They get paid, of course, differently, etc. So they are not one group who can really stick together because they have different positions. On one farm, normally there is like 100 to 400 laborers who are in trabalho escravo. Well, these are mostly men, non-white men who are poor and don't have a lot of education. Yeah, and as I already said, it's very hard work, long working hours, and so on. Another very important issue that is very connected to unfree labor in the Amazon region is land distribution and land disputes. So a very few people own vast areas of land, which also means that there are a lot of landless people who want to have land, or people who have a little bit of land but cannot produce their subsistence on this little bit of land that they have, and who are searching for jobs. So it is mostly elites who practice land grabbing, who take, for example, public land or indigenous lands, at least now, as well as lands from nature reserves, which leads very often to violent conflicts, even with the indigenous population, for example, which in turn generates a general violent situation on the countryside in the Amazon region, and as well a sense of impunity, because there are laws against this, of course, but yeah, I don't know, the legal procedures last very long, then somebody doesn't appear anymore, and so on, until in the end nothing happens. So both of these kinds of impunity for the elites, as well as this land situation and the general violence, facilitates, of course, a system like trabalho escravo. And then as well, we can say that the Amazon region is peripherally integrated. So all of the products produced there, the earnings of these products, they don't stay there. They normally go either into the south of Brazil, or the products are exported and come to Europe, to China, to the US. Yeah. As I already mentioned, most of the laborers freed from trabalho escravo are men. So if I say freed from, this also means there is a big part of this situation that we don't know because we only know the cases that came to light. But I think it is important to mention that women are also affected by the slavery situation. Okay, 6% of women also could work on the farms, for example, as cooks or cleaners, and some mentioned sex workers. But also, even if the women don't work on the farm, they could be still affected because, well, most of the men form part of some kind of family unit. So the idea for them is to go to Pará to earn money for the family unit. So this money doesn't come. This affects also the whole family, but also in terms of worries about the laborer who left, who doesn't come back. And people, of course, know that something terrible could have happened to them. And it is often mothers, for example, who initiate some search for these laborers, and finally some rescue missions, let's say. Then, of course, there is in urban Trabalho in Pará, I'm talking about Pará, there is also women in domestic service. In some other states, like São Paulo, in the textile industry, there is also a lot of women, but in Pará, it's maybe probably mainly the domestic services. Yeah, one problem, of course, is the invisibility of women's labor in general and of the types of labor of women's labor. I think I have a citation here. Yes. So yeah, Natalia Suzuki from a Brazilian newspaper who works a lot with this problematic told me about these women. So she said we had a recent case, I think it was 2017 or 18, that was about mining. There, men were mining and the women were doing domestic services and sex work. And this is also a question of trabalho escravo because they were also dependent. They were in the mines with accumulated debts and with their labor activities, sexual as well as domestic, mediated through debt relationships. There is an invisibility of women because of their gender, as well as because of the type of work that these women do. Domestic labor is, for example, not considered labor. With sex work, the people are also not accustomed to see it as labor, as a profitable activity that both generates resources and demands rights for the laborers. Yeah, with the idea of racism, it is a bit similar. There is no studies that I know about the connection between racism and trabalho escravo. In 2014, like everybody more or less told me that there is no connection. Not everybody, but nearly everybody told me that there is no connection. And now it's a bit different, but the only connection that is seen is structural racism. So most Black people are poor, most people who are in trabalho escravo are poor. So this is why it's mainly Black people who are in trabalho escravo. But I would say that this is kind of a bit, yeah, well, my idea about it, that they serve as mechanisms, that racism serves as a mechanism of legitimization. So maybe probably also in an intersection with class prejudices. So for example, employers say like they like it like this. This is why they give them only this kind of food or whatever, because they want it this way, for example. Then of course internalized racism for sure plays a role. So the laborers themselves also feel that they don't deserve the normal labor rights that people deserve, for example. Now there is on both topics a bit more attention on the women topic and on the topic of domestic service even more, which is kind of cool that changed, but there is still not a lot of attention to it. Okay, so now let's come to the political changes. Well, here is just a little list. So from 2011 to 2014, we had the government of Dilma Rousseff, the Labour Party. In 2014, this lista suja got suspended for 1 or 2 years. So this was also like behind the scenes political fights. One association of different groups of construction services wanted to suspend the list, and they managed to do it for some years at least. And yeah, then people tell me that also at the time, this labor inspection group began to be weakened because they got less and less money. So it's a problem of money, and less people who how do you say? Less and less people who worked there. Then in 2016, President Rousseff got impeached, and interim President Michel Temer took over. Here in 2017, he created two labor reforms. Two reforms concern labor. The one labor reform both weakened the position of the laborers, and the outsourcing law opened up to legal pseudo self-employment, even more, let's say. And then in 2018, Jair Bolsonaro got elected. We have to say that there were no real changes, at least in the law against Trabalho escravo, even though since many, many times the land-owning elites tried to change the definition again, but it didn't manage to do it. And his violent discourse on indigenous people, on the economization of the Amazon region, on arming, on allowing people to arm themselves, etc., of course, had a big impact on the Amazon region. So, if we look at the numbers of freed people, it's important to know that this is not, it doesn't mirror the reality, reflect the reality. It's people free. Here I don't see as well, but you see, okay, that the law started in 1995, so there is not many people free yet, and then we had a peak in 2008, and then it went down again. We can clearly see that in 2014, 2015, it went down a lot. So with these changes that already changed during the government of Dilma Rousseff, and then recently they went up again. In 2022, there were, it's not on the slide, thank you. There were over 2,000 laborers freed, so it's still going up again. The question is more, why did it rise again if the labor inspection still gets less and less money? This is a bit unclear. My interviewees told me that it is for sure because these labor inspectors that are still there did an enormous effort, even in the free time, etc., in order to rise these numbers again and to free people. In Pará, this looks a bit like that. Pará always was the first place in unfree labor, in people freed from unfree labor. Now it's on the 4th place, so you can see this really going down. But also a bit up, I think, and in the last years, I think, at least in 2002, it was over 200 people who were freed in Pará. And why did it go down in Pará? Why it stayed more or less down, while it went up again in the whole Brazil? Which something that is very, very weird, even though Pará always was at the top of unfree labor, they have less labor inspectors than in other states. So the question is why? I got told this is like the typical injustice of distribution of inspectors that has to do with the peripherization of Pará, which I can imagine to be true. One of the labor inspectors I interviewed told me that there are a lot of reports of unfree labor, but they can't follow it because it's too much. And he also said that they got a lot of threats in the last year, in the last years, and before they could go alone to do these inspections, but now they have to have police to do it, which also means they have to spend more money and they have to do some bureaucratic things, and this means it lasts a long time until they really can do the inspection which in some cases means that they then won't find the laborers anymore when they're actually there. So yeah, one further possible explications are the costs. So in Pará, we have these labor situations in the middle of the jungle somewhere. There is no road to go there, so people have to go there with helicopter or whatever. While in other states, these, I don't know, sugarcane in São Paulo, it's more accessible, so it's cheaper to go there. So one other reason might be that there is less labor inspections in Pará because it's so expensive, and if they have no money, it's easier to do the things that are not that expensive. So yeah, this is just some possible explication, to be honest. What are other changes in the labor regime? One thing that I've found personally very sad is the weakening of social movements. So when I was there in 2014, the CPT, it's like a Christian social movement who tried to help laborers who were very important in freeing unfree laborers in Pará, in the Amazon region at least. They had, I think at least double the personnel back then, or maybe triple the personnel back then, and now they have lost a lot of people because also they don't have the money anymore. And then the labor unions, when I was there in 2014, every little town had their own labor union with some people, and now they have, I think, 3 or 4 headquarters in the whole Pará. It went down radically. It's really surprising, to be honest. And then there is the MST, which is the Landwirtschaft movement. That in 2014, I visited one of their squatted lands. So they squat lands, but only because they come there with families to build up little towns. So they only do it for enterprises where they know that it did something wrong. So either if the farmer took public land, or if they produced drugs on the land, or if they used Trabalho. So this is they are the only reasons why they would go to swap the land. So yeah, and this one camp that I visited in 2014 got destroyed. I was actually and another lady told me what happened to this camp. Gunmen and farmers troops arrived at the camp at night and started to set fire, and people ran out of the shacks and cluttered into the woods. The gunmen, set fire to the houses. Then the people had to run out in the middle of the night. They took only the children out of the houses, while the gunmen, set fire. So it was very violent. So they had a lot of violent conflicts, this Landwirtschaft movement, which is also the reason why they diminished by a lot, because people are afraid to belong to such a movement at the moment. And the whole movement has very little capacities for the moment. So yeah, as you can see here, and also with this citation, the land conflicts even became more violent in the last years, and there is more impunity about these things. This camp that I visited from the Landless movement, in 2014 it seemed clear that they would get the land by law. The legal proceedings have still not ended, so we can see how these things are working for the moment. Yeah. And okay, other things that people told me are that there are new products. Illegal mining seems to have spiked. Unfree Labour in illegal mining seems to have spiked dramatically in the last years. You can see this also from the people freed from Unfree Labour. And then there are things that people just told me. I don't know, acai. I think people now know what acai is also in Europe. Cacao, etc. Then there was another question that I found very interesting, and I haven't answered it for myself yet. Maybe I won't. So through this labor market flexibilization, there could be new forms of trabalho escravo. The question is, can they really be defined as trabalho escravo or not? Today, maybe they wouldn't, but should the laws be changed again to include some flexible forms of trabalho escravo? This idea is that there are families or individuals who are supposedly self-employed, but who get the initial investment from some enterprise. They get the tools and whatever they need from some enterprise. Then they set up their own enterprise, but they're only allowed to sell their product to this one enterprise who gave the initial investment. And if they need something new, they buy it from there. But this enterprise who gave the initial investment can set the prices however they want, because they only are allowed to sell to them. So there is also a cycle of investment going on. Yeah. Okay. So we come to more or less to the end. So let's think about the global part of this. So this unfree labor in Brazil is, of course, not only a problem for Brazil. It has something to do with us. So most of these products are produced for export. Brazilian meat is very well known on the global meat market. I don't know if there are meat lovers between you, but these cattle is it's bred extensively, so it's very good meat. The cows can run around and can eat the grass wherever. So yeah, I don't know, this should be good for the meat if the cows are very free there. And then yeah, I don't know, all the acai that we get in Europe, all of it comes from Pará. This only grows in Pará, for example. So all of this is exported. Also, noble wood is exported. There is also some development where trabalho escravo is used in Pará. Then ethanol and different like palm oil and different other oils. We can also go from the other way around. So there were some very well-known cases in Brazil. The case of Zara was very well known in 2011. There, some supplier who only produced for Zara got caught with unfree labor in São Paulo, in the textile production, of course. Then, for example, the Paribas Bank supports one meat producer in Brazil who also were caught with trabalho escravo, Mafric, and it also produces in Pará, but also in other states. And also recently I saw an article where Nivea, but also other enterprises use ethanol from products from a producer in Brazil who used where the trabalho escravo was found in sugar production in São Paulo. So there are these chains of products coming to Europe or to other parts of the world. Then, of course, we can say that the global system of competition is strengthening systems like trabalho escravo because it's cheap, and so this creates market advantages, etc. And of course, we also can mention that unfree labor exists probably everywhere in the world, also in Europe. So we can think about, I don't know, tomatoes in Spain, where unfree laborers work, or illegalized African people in Italian agriculture, or all the reports about German meat industry, for example, or the Turkish textile industry, etc. Okay, so that's it from my side.